Now we won't. Hmm. Hi. Thanks for being patient, and thanks for coming. Hi. Thanks for being patient, and thanks for coming. And Rick Maynard says, evening all. And Bonnie says, hi everyone, I enjoy. Hi Lana. Says, happy Thursday, and hello, fine people. Ronnie Sukam says, hello. And Lana Dell says, Bonnie Firestone, would you hook your husband up with some nice intro music while we wait for him to share? I think if you hook me up with some nice intro. Steve Larchuk has joined. Hey, Steve, how are you tonight? Nice to see you. Okay, I'm going to start off. As long as everybody can hear me, and as long as you can see me. So if you can't, now's the time to comment. And also, please share for me so I can get some distribution on this. I did a little bit of sharing, but I certainly need your help. Hi, Dolores. Nice to see you. So, more straws in the wind for tonight. I knew I forgot something. Specifically, I forgot to get up some of the straws in the wind so I could share them with you. So I'll get some of those up here. Okay, so let's start with the first of these, since it's probably the most important. Oh, very good. We had a lot more people join up. So I'm going to share the screen now. Article from Common Dreams by Jake Johnson. He seems to do the most important articles there, doesn't he? He must be the senior guy. Anyway, the headline is Never Seen Anything Like It. Economists warn 6.6 million new jobless claims portend unparalleled crisis. Of course, you know by now that this is in addition to the 3.3 million jobless claims, 3.28 million claims from last week. So the total number of unemployment claims for the month of March went up to 10.4 million claims. Just a little over 10 million claims. Was it 10 million? Let's see. 3.28 and something like 6.6. No, probably just short, okay, of 10 million for the last 2 weeks of March, and the rest, the first 2 weeks. But 10.4 million altogether, surpassing the number of jobs lost during the entirety of the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009. And that's only the first month of this particular economic downturn. So, Heidi Shierholz of the Economic Policy Institute said that in her decades of studying the labor market, she has never seen anything like the spike in unemployment that we've experienced over the past 2 weeks. And she tweeted that the chart is a portrait of disaster. Yes, it certainly is. The curve is straight up for the unemployment claims over the last 2 weeks. Straight up. You very rarely see a straight up graph like this for weekly unemployment claims. In fact, this is the only time I can remember seeing it. And of course, they mention here the stimulus package, 1,200 direct cash payment to millions of Americans, and the $600 increase in unemployment benefits for a period of 4 months, but those benefits have not yet reached the bank accounts of those who are ineligible. So they had to pay rent on the first of the month, and for many people there was no money there for them to pay their rent with and other first part of the month bills with. And Ben Dixon tweeted, quote, any politician not calling for a minimum of $2,000 a month in a universal basic income and nationalized health care will be complicit with the total collapse of our system, unquote. Sunrise Movement made a similarly bold statement saying we need a Green New Deal. And the article also goes but to Miguel Faria y Castro, the economist from the Federal Reserve, who predicted that the unemployment rate by the end of June would rise to 32.1%. It's now already very close to 10%. That is just in the last week alone, it rose by 4%, and the week before it rose by 2%. So in the last 2 weeks, it's risen by 6%. Jared Bernstein, senior fellow at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and someone who'd been the chief economist for Joe Biden in the Obama period, tweeted Thursday, my camera has gone south a bit, so I will have to adjust that. If you'll excuse me for just a moment while I do that. Here I am again. Sorry to be so long in coming back, but it's not always entirely transparent. So, okay, so Jared says that he's congenitally a careful wait and see type, but not now, he says in caps. He pointed out there's a debate in Congress about whether to quickly add more economic stimulus or wait and see what happens with what we've done so far. What should go into phase 4 stimulus, he said, is nutritional support, very helpful during the last time we had a recession. State fiscal support, states facing huge demands amidst the revenues that are tanking. More help to households through round 2 checks and increased unemployment insurance beyond the end of by July. Too conservative. Jared's always too conservative. Quoting a famous scene from the movie Jaws, however, he added, quote, we're going to need a bigger boat, unquote. Yeah, we're going to need a bigger boat than only round 2 checks. And the unemployment insurance is probably going to have to last a long time before things come back. I think actually Rashida Tlaib's bill is much more to the point. There needs to be a basic income for now, at least for the whole of the coronavirus crisis and for a year thereafter. There also needs to be a federal job guarantee. I think the Sunrise Movement knows that and will be pressing for it, and a lot of us will also be pressing for it. Let's look at what the American Prospect's Dave Dayen had to say today, April 2nd, 2020. He, of course, was right there with the news about the unemployment number. He puts it at 6,648,000. Unemployment filers reflects an economy in a coma during this widespread forced distancing. Over 10 million workers have now been affected. And he points out this deep freeze to date has only one offset: the economic survival package passed last week. He says Congress typically moves in slow motion, but there have been some developments in the past 7 days, though while the speed is positive, not everything being done actually matches that. Let's look at what's happening. He goes into the unemployment insurance and he points out that when the weekly checks start to appear with the extra $600, that should replace income up to $50,000 to $60,000 a year, but not income up to $75,000 a year. That's not going to replace that. He points out also, depending on the state, in some states it will only be $50,000 a year, in some states it'll go up to $60,000 a year. That's because of the variability in the basic unemployment checks. And there I am again with the instability of the camera. This time it came back very easily, but I need to share the screen. So if you'll wait for a second, I will share that screen for you. Okay, there we go. Right. Dave Dayen's stuff. So Dave then talks about when the funds would be released. He points out that Labor Secretary Eugene Scalia told the Wall Street Journal that funds would be released to the states this week. He said the same thing in a news conference on the coronavirus with Trump standing there today. But that doesn't mean the $600 will get to filers immediately. It depends on the state overburdened unemployment systems to distribute the money. Scalia didn't know when that was going to begin. Of course. Laid-off workers practically everywhere report the delays in getting their claims filed. But the clock for the enhanced unemployment does not appear to stop ticking. It ends at the end of July. So if you have to wait a couple of weeks to get through your state system, it seems you've lost that $600 boost on the back end. There's $1 billion that's been appropriated for the UI systems of the states, but that's stretched over the whole nation. The IRS released guidelines for the payments on Monday, and it initially said that people who haven't filed a tax return in the past 2 years because they have no tax liability would need to quickly file. That included Social Security recipients, which was against the letter of the law. We covered that just yesterday. Here we want to note that by Wednesday night, the IRS had reversed itself, saying that Social Security recipients would not need to file taxes. But others, like veterans, disabled people, and people with low income, still might have to file. In other words, people on what's called the SSDI program, like myself, like Bonnie, will not have to wait because they will go to the Social Security Administration after all to get any contact information they need to send the checks out. Now, I wasn't sure that we were going to have to wait anyway because I think the IRS has our stuff, but I didn't really check. But anyway, either way, we and many of the people who live here are going to get that. But for people on the SSI program, that is the disability program of Social Security, and veterans and people with low incomes, still might have to file taxes before they get their $1,200 checks. And, of course, the tax filing centers are not open due to the coronavirus, right? So how are people going to get the help they need to file those taxes? Private sector tax filing companies have promised to make free do-it-yourself returns easier to file, but that hasn't happened yet. Nobody's ready for this, and Congress wasn't ready to devise a delivery system that would actually work in, say, a week, which is what was needed. The IRS has promised to create a portal for direct deposit information if it's not already on file with the IRS, but that too hasn't happened. If the IRS has your banking information, the 1200 will appear within a couple of weeks. Why it takes them a couple of weeks if they have your banking information, I don't know. But they say it'll take them a couple of weeks. I mean, it doesn't take a couple of weeks to get the loan money to the big businesses that are now applying for it. It just takes a decision by Mnuchin. But for you, it's going to take a couple of weeks. If not, a check will be mailed, and that could take up to 4 months. Okay, evidently, the Postal Service is a lot slower than we thought it was. On small business loans, the news seems better here. The Treasury Department and the SBA released guidelines for its loans on Tuesday, which are forgivable if the proceeds go to 8 weeks of payroll costs and other core operating expenses like rent. The first payment is deferred for 6 months. No collateral is necessary, and no fees are paid by the borrower. The forgivable loan can be as high as $10 million. Small businesses would receive the funds through private banks, and the application is remarkably short for a government program. Even if it's not a grant, the loan pays a skinny 0.5%. Now that is a good loan. Businesses can apply as soon as Friday. So liberals have thrilled, says Dave, because this is like Denmark's payroll support program, attaching workers to their businesses while keeping literally millions of places alive. But here are a couple of small qualifications. The House Financial Services Committee, in a letter to administration officials, notes that while all federally insured banks could participate in the program, if they are not already an SBA-approved lender, they must fill out an application. However, there are no available application forms. Catch-22 once again. Moreover, banks have indicated that they will not work with businesses they don't already work with, and that they've not given clear enough guidelines on how to manage the program. Banks seem to not want to vet unfamiliar business owners for fear of getting hit with fines if things go badly. And Dave says that's kind of a cover story, I'd say. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin isn't going to be charging to fine banks. Yes, he's right. He's not going to be charging into the fray to fine the banks. So Dave thinks this is a cover story. In other words, he thinks it's just a rationalization. Their real complaint seems to be that the interest rate is too low. And Dave says this has shades of the HAMP program, HAMP, the foreclosure mitigation program, run through private banks and ineffective at actually delivering relief. Yes. Anytime you go through private banks, it's a problem. Why can't small business owners have accounts at the Federal Reserve? So the Federal Reserve can mark up those accounts. Why not? What's wrong with that? Second, there's the question of businesses who have already laid people off. They can rehire those employees to ensure they're spending 75% of their loans on payroll is the threshold for forgiveness. However, as Jordan Weissman indicates, some employees may resist being rehired because they can get more on the expanded unemployment plan. There are workarounds to this, like hiring others or keeping the money as a short-term cushion, but it slightly undermines the purpose of keeping people attached to their businesses, the supposed purpose of keeping people attached to their businesses. The bigger problem to me is that this covers 8 weeks of expenses. Does anyone think things will be hunky-dory in 8 weeks? When? It's already 10% unemployment? Plus, the $350 billion for this program is likely to drain fast, given that there are 30 million small businesses out there. Speaker Pelosi and Ro Khanna are fighting to allow venture capital companies to tap the resources. And yesterday I talked, says Dave, I talked about private equity-backed firms seeking the cash too. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin has talked about re-upping the program if the money runs out, but only one party is that interested in coming back to Washington for any legislating. And you know who that is. Mitch McConnell threw cold water on a quick Phase 4 plan just yesterday. Small businesses would be in the hole with no income for many weeks under that scenario. And Dave says, I'm pessimistic they'd be able to hold out. Incidentally, while banks get no money from borrowers for making these loans, they do get processing fees that should work out to billions of dollars for the banks. The usual, there's always billions of dollars for the banks in all these programs, right? The airline bailouts, another short application form and a request to apply by Friday. So that's a deadline. That's not a deadline. It's just for expedited processing. These would be payroll support grants, and Treasury has asked the applicants to figure out an appropriate compensation for the government in the form of equity stakes or some other method. Workers led by the Flight Attendants Union, but Sarah Nelson was on The Rising this morning explaining this. Really very passionate explanation, have rejected the call for warrants on grants, saying that airlines won't take the relief and tens of thousands will lose their jobs. And she said in a letter to Treasury and also on The Rising, quote, this effectively renders the payroll grants a poison pill, unquote. The union said in a letter to Treasury. The equity stake, they say, should come on future loans, the other half of the $50 billion in the program. But Democratic lawmakers have said that whatever conditions should be, quote, reasonable, unquote, and not slow the outlay of cash. The grants also rule out airlines sharing flights, which the airlines have already floated. And Dave points out the fact that Boeing, which is part of this bailout program, is offering voluntary buyouts to employees, suggests that some companies will opt for layoffs over aid. as the unions suggest. CEO of Boeing has already rejected equity stakes for the government, but other airlines have indicated they'll take the money. Meanwhile, the payroll support is only required for 6 months, and guess what? The airlines have lined up to say they'll start downsizing the day that 6 months expires. So if the government wants to continue this, it's going to have to give them more money at the end of 6 months to induce them to continue to keep their workers on. Meanwhile, Treasury is hiring 3 boutique Wall Street banks in an advisory role on how best to give out the money. PJT Partners Inc., and also Moelis and Perella Weinberg got the plum assignments. Dave says at least somebody's getting hired. And then Dave gets to the actual bailout. While there's been a lot of transparency about these other aspects of the aid package, almost nothing has been released about the piece of it that dwarfs the rest. The $4.5 trillion Federal Reserve money cannon to which Treasury will commit $454 billion from the CARES Act. The programs for individuals and small businesses mentioned above come to maybe $1 trillion. And there are nagging questions as to whether that will be enough and whether it will get to everyone that needs it in time. There are no such questions with the money cannon. And Congress won't have room to ask such questions either. Lawmakers are working remotely, a less than ideal circumstance for oversight, and almost all of the decisions can be made virtually unilaterally by Mnuchin and Fed Chair Jerome Powell. The White House has already indicated he will ignore some of the oversight. As Matt Stoller notes, this is now a planned economy planned by Donald Trump and his functionaries. I would call them cronies, of course. Congress gave him that power, and he's likely to use it. And, of course, Congress will be responsible for how he uses it because of the fact they didn't ram oversight down his throat. What they should have done is passed, an impeachment bill and said that he would be convicted if he didn't comply with the oversight. Gee, I know that wouldn't have been possible given the political atmosphere in Washington right now. As of this morning, the New York Times shows 214,461 cases of the coronavirus in the U.S., or I should say of COVID-19, in the U.S. That compares with 188,247 yesterday. So we're looking at upwards of 26,000 new cases found in one day, and 4,841 deaths, roughly 900 up from 3,921 just yesterday. And it looks like we're going to be getting over 5,000 deaths very soon. Most probably by tomorrow morning we'll find out that we are over one. We'll be breaking the milestone of 5,000 deaths if we get more than 1,000 deaths by tomorrow morning. There are questions as to the accuracy of basically all these case and death numbers all over the world, with suspicions of undercounting. But the trajectory of what we know, is really bad. There aren't simply suspicions. They're not suspicions, of undercounting. There are projections from good modelers that show that cases all over the world have gone up to 7 million at least already. So there I am again. So that's what we're coping with now, most probably. And 7 million was a very low estimate. Some modeling in the UK, all they would do was to give you a variability. They called it a minimum of 7 million cases and a maximum of 43 million cases. In other words, the variability covers a lot, of territory. If we split the difference, we'd be at 25 million coronavirus cases, in the world. Very, very bad. Okay, I won't go over the rest of this now. That was the news from the American Prospect that I thought was very important that I wanted to go over. So let me share the screen again and get to the next straw in the wind. Maybe I should change the title of this stream to Straws in the Wind as opposed to the in-depth show. I don't know. Maybe I should change the title to Outrages of the Day. So again, here's President Trump. He reverses himself on the relief payments coming for the SSI recipients after a wave of backlash from advocates and lawmakers, among the Democrats. This is another article by Jake Johnson that appeared this morning. But critics were quick to warn that the administration's reversal, announced in a statement by Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, does not cover low-income recipients of supplemental security income, the SSI program, and veterans benefits, leaving the roadblock to getting their money in the way of these very vulnerable groups, said advocates. Could mean millions will not receive relief that is desperately needed. Social Security Works, of course, is right on the money here, tweeting very quickly that the administration needs to do for the recipients of SSI and veterans pensions what it's just done for Social Security recipients, that is, the recipients of the SSDI program. Now, the CARES Act does explicitly give the Treasury Department the authority to use SSA and Veterans Administration data already on file to distribute payments to those who did not file tax returns in 2018 or 2019 because they didn't owe federal taxes. But in spite of that, the Treasury Department is still maintaining that it's not going to automatically give the money to vets. So grateful for their service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. You'll get yours late. You'll get yours late. So there's that, and the Treasury Department just isn't able to manage giving people debit cards loaded up with their payments that could be used for other purposes sometime in the future. They're just not going to do that, evidently. But we'll see. There's an outcry about that. So maybe in another day they'll fold on that one too. Hopefully they will. So, next straw in the wind. Here's the Trump administration being nice again. One more time from Jake Johnson again, April 2nd. The Trump Labor Department is accused of quietly twisting the law to slash paid sick leave in the middle of the pandemic. Two Democratic members of Congress on Thursday accused the Department of Labor of quietly, quote, twisting the law, unquote, to limit the scope of already inadequate paid sick leave provisions contained in a coronavirus stimulus package that President Trump signed into law last month. Over the weekend, the Labor Department, headed by former corporate lawyer Eugene Scalia, published policy guidance on the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA. I don't know if they're going to call that FECRA, that Senator Patty Murray and Representative by Rosa DeLauro, both Democrats. Patty Murray is a senator from Washington, and Rosa DeLauro is a very senior House member from Connecticut. She was a leader in the fight over the TPP. And she said, the two of them said that the Labor Department was creating several gratuitous loopholes, allowing corporations to limit the number of employees who were eligible for paid leave. Anne Murray said they were twisting the law to allow employers to shirk their responsibility and significantly narrowing which workers are eligible for paid leave. And Patty said, this simply can't stand. This guidance needs to be rewritten so workers get the leave they are guaranteed under the law. The FECRA, which Trump signed into law on March 18th, provides 2 weeks of paid sick leave to eligible workers who fall ill and 12 weeks of leave to workers caring for children whose schools have closed due to the COVID-19 outbreak. The bill excludes workers at companies with more than 500 employees. Evidently, when they passed that bill, it was Be Nice to Huge Corporations Week. In a detailed letter to Scalia on Wednesday, which is linked to in this article, but Patty Murray and Rosa DeLauro said the Labor Department's guidance blatantly contradicts the plain language of the FECRA and violates congressional intent. One example highlighted by Patty Murray, came by Rosa DeLauro, is the Labor Department's definition of unable to work. According to them, quote, you are unable to work if your employer has worked for you in one of the COVID-19 qualifying reasons set forth in the FECRA, but prevents you from being able to perform that work either under normal circumstances at your normal work site or by means of telework, the Labor Department wrote in its guidance. And Murray and Rosa DeLauro also said that definition will allow, quote, all employers to evade the requirements of the Act at any point during this pandemic by informing employees that it does not have work for them to perform at the moment, thereby fully depriving them of a day, a week, or 12 weeks of paid leave, unquote. And they went on to say, quote, nothing in the text of the FECRA indicates the employer must have work for an employee to perform on any particular day for that employee to be able to qualify for paid leave on that day. Nor does it give employers the authority to refuse their employees their statutory right to paid leave by not assigning them work, furloughing them, or closing a particular work site. Unquote. In a press release Patty Murray and Rosa DeLauro summarized their concerns with the Labor Department guidance, warning that it would first require certification in order for workers to qualify for paid leave. The Department of Labor stated employers can require certification for employees to qualify for paid leave, even though that's not in the FECRA. Second, it would restrict what qualifies as being unable to work. DOL states that employees only qualify for paid sick or family leave if they are unable to work and their employer has worked for them. But there's nothing in the FECRA that says that. Third, would restrict the worker's ability to take leave intermittently. Okay, and the DOL states that an employee may only take their leave intermittently if your employer allows it. But this conclusion is nowhere in the text of the Act and gives the employer, rather than the employee who has the need for leave, the ability to decide how to use the employee's leave. Isn't this so dirty? Really dirty. Really dirty of Scalia. But given his last name, it's not surprising that it's really dirty. Okay, so exempt, I'm assuming that he's a relative of Antonin Scalia, the famous Antonin. Third, exempt employees from paid leave. FECRA exempts narrowly defined healthcare providers from the provisions due to the nature of the current crisis. But without authority, the DOL redefined a healthcare provider to include nearly any employee who happens to work for an employer who also employs a healthcare provider, works in any type of quasi-medical facility, works as an employee contracted for non-healthcare services in a facility that houses a healthcare provider, or merely works in the medical supply chain. Jeez. Not guaranteeing paid leave during a shelter-in-place order. DOL does not clarify that a government directive to stay at home qualifies for paid leave. In fact, DOL even indicates that employees lose their right to paid leave if their employer closes the employee's work site in the event of a government directive. This clearly defies the FECRA, which grants paid leave to employees who are subject to quarantine or isolation orders from government officials. So, of course, the two ladies were slightly angry at all of this misinterpretation of the FECRA. And they're making it very clear that they're not going to take this lying down. And I suspect, since it is gross misinterpretation of the law, that what will probably happen is that Secretary Scalia will change the guidance. Now, by how much, okay, I don't know, but this is just another instance of the meanness of this administration, going so far as to distort a law with very plain meaning. Very plain meaning. Anyway, that was the latest mean straw in the wind, which is what much of this, okay, is about, of course. And now we come to another straw in the wind. Guess what? The DNC postponed the Milwaukee convention of the Democratic Party from July to August. But Wisconsin is still holding its primary next week right in the middle of the COVID virus crisis. Critics say that's absolutely foolish to hold the Wisconsin primary next week. This is an article from Common Dreams written by Owen Higgins. I think that's how he pronounces his name. I'd almost bet it is, but I don't know that for sure. Anyway, the Democratic National Convention scheduled for this July in Milwaukee has been pushed back to August due to public health concerns about the outbreak of COVID 19, even as Wisconsin is forging ahead with plans to have statewide elections, including party primaries, next week on April 7th, 5 days from now, despite concerns raised by public health officials. But the Democratic governor and the legislature, okay, the Republican legislature in Wisconsin, won't move to cancel the in-person portion of a primary that is happening in Wisconsin next Tuesday. In a statement Thursday, convention CEO Joe Solomony said he was certain that the show would go on, even though it was going to be delayed. Okay, a DNC official said to Politico that the convention would be a more modest affair than recent events, given the likely continuation and exacerbation of coronavirus-fueled recession. Well, maybe that's a good thing because maybe the DNC won't owe so much to big business then. Quote, people are going to be hurting, the official said. Quote again, it's not a time to be lavish, unquote. Yes, it would be, I think, very unappreciated by the constituency of the Democratic Party if the convention was too lavish. As the New York Times has reported, the proposed August rescheduling is hardly more certain to be safe than July, as there is no way to predict what stage the pandemic will be at by that point. Former vice president, who currently enjoys a substantial delegate lead in the presidential primary over Bernie Sanders, on Wednesday night suggested that the convention be delayed to August due to the outbreak. Maybe Joe Biden hopes that by August there will be new medication available to him that will somehow heal his obvious incapacity to be the nominee of the Democratic Party as well as the future president of the United States. A forlorn hope, I believe. The Times noted that the coronavirus outbreak has thrown the entire nominating process into chaos, with multiple states postponing their primary elections due to the disease, and Bernie Sanders maintaining his position in the contest as long as he has a path to victory. And Joe Biden won't be able to clinch the nomination until June at the earliest if Bernie stays in the race. On Wednesday, Bernie called on Wisconsin to delay its primary in the interest of public health. He said people should not be forced to put their lives on the line to vote, which is why 15 states are now following the advice of public health experts and delaying their elections. Wisconsin state officials are determined to go ahead. This issue was taken up in federal court, but it's anticipated that the federal court is going to rule that this is a state matter and not something that should be taken to federal court, because federal judge William Conley on Wednesday warned that public health consequences of the vote could be disastrous, and implied the ramifications were on the lawmakers in the state. And he said, quote, "You don't get to go to a federal judge and say conditions are impinging on voting rights, so you get to stop a statewide elections," said Conley. "I'm sorry, that's what the situation is, but this is a public health crisis that the state legislature and governor have refused to accept as severe enough to stop this statewide election." And that's true. It is a statewide election. Why haven't the state authorities stepped up? Wisconsin has seen an unprecedented level of requests for mail-in ballots. The state's elections commission administrator Megan Wolf said on Tuesday. She said, "There's no one place where we're seeing shortages. It truly is all across the state." Thursday is the deadline to request an absentee ballot. Thursday, of course, was today. Meanwhile, polling places around Wisconsin are closing. In Green Bay alone, these are possibly dropping from 31 to 4, leaving voters with limited options on where to cast a ballot and presenting a potential crush of people at voting locations at a time when social distancing is most important. Isn't that ridiculous? Isn't that absolutely a travesty? And isn't it a way to suppress the vote? Just another way to suppress the vote. Governor Tony Evers on Wednesday ordered the National Guard to help at polling places because they don't expect the volunteers, who are mostly old people, are going to come out and risk their lives. It's a travesty. It is a travesty. As Vox's Ian Millhiser pointed out on Thursday, the Wisconsin elections is still up in the air in light of the pandemic, Conley's expected ruling, and the state's electoral process. It is far from clear, in other words, he says, whether the election will happen on Tuesday, how that election will be run, or who will get to decide how the election is run, said Mr. Millhiser. So that is that. So what do we have here? We have a list of very mean and irrational things that are going on. And in the middle of all this, we have a full-blown unemployment insurance crisis like none we have ever seen before. 1 week from now, it will be a surprise if we don't get even more new applications for unemployment insurance at a time where the resources of the states to handle that are totally inadequate. Totally inadequate. And the federal government will not get the money to people through direct means. And where are the people who can legislate that this be done? They're off. They're off in their home districts. Hopefully, while they're there, they'll get such an outcry through their teletown halls, because now they're holding teletown halls because they are not actually allowed. They are not allowed to gather in groups in physical town halls. So it's going to have to be virtual town halls. And in those town halls, they're likely to get an outcry. An outcry like, what the hell are you doing at home? Why aren't you back there legislating how to get money into people's hands now when they need it? Now when they have to pay their rent? Now when they have to pay their utility bills? Now when they have to pay the water bills? If you can't get the money into people's hands now, why don't you just give them a moratorium on rent, and a moratorium on utility bills, and a moratorium on their mortgage bills? Why aren't you doing that? What are you doing here? Why aren't you back there? You're getting your full pay. You don't have any economic hardship out of this. And the unemployment crisis is accelerating. And what are you doing about that? People want to work. Why isn't there a federal job guarantee program for them in place now? The businesses they've been working in don't pay enough in the first place. But completely apart from that, completely apart, there is the issue of all of the work carrying social value that needs to be done in beginning to work on the Green New Deal and beginning to work on people's needs throughout this crisis. People need help. They need social contacts. Now, it can't be in person, but it can be at a distance. It can be over the web. The workers can be supplied with the equipment and training that they need to give advice to people who are stuck at home and who can't go anywhere, and who are not able to see other people. Community needs are very, very great now, and they cannot be delivered in person, but they could be delivered very successfully by other people who, while physically isolated, themselves are working for the Job Guarantee Program and are being paid to remotely help out people caught in this horrible situation. Why isn't there such a job guarantee program? We're approaching a time when there will be more pandemics, when there will be more crises caused by the climate emergency, when there are going to be lots of interruptions to our economy. Those will be standard fare. And when these occur, we're going to need a stabilization program that is permanently there that gives people a landing place to allow them to do good and valuable work, which is paid at a living wage. Let's get that federal job guarantee bill. It's in Bernie Sanders' platform. Let's get that done. And let's get a Medicare for All bill. Sorely needed right now. So we can cut down on the economic hardships that people who sustain the COVID-19 illness will have to suffer under the present system, which does not work for people who get sick. It does not work for most people who get sick. It stinks. We need a system that will be free at the point of service for everyone, and that will allow them to go, generally speaking, to any doctor or any facility they wish to go to. That is what Medicare for All means to people. And that's what we have to give them. So, I am now going to move to your comments. I noticed there have been a lot of them. Thank you for that. I hope you've been sharing. And Carmen says, sound is quite low. Good evening. Nice to be able to be here. Greetings, Dr. Joe. Steve said, Doc, please up the volume. I'm sorry, I didn't realize there was a problem with the volume. I was busy. I was busy talking, and I did not notice the comments. And Cora Emanuel has joined and says hi. And Steve Wolfbrand says, this economy is going to get bad, very, very bad. People still working should do wildcat strikes. Yes, they should, because they're not being protected. They've got to do the wildcat strikes. Lana says, 25% unemployment was during the Great Depression. Is that right? 24.9% was the exact figure, I believe. Yes, that is roughly right. The latest forecast from the Federal Reserve is that this depression, that figure is going to rise to 32.1%. Unprecedented in American history. Stacy said there was not a gallon of milk at the grocery store all day. That's amazing. That's amazing. Lana said, lost the sound completely now. Ronnie Sukamp said no eggs either. Steve said the sound is very low here. Gee, I'm just, not aware of that. I have the volume turned up high. Yep, it's turned up to maximum on my computer. It must somehow be a function of the internet. My mic is on, and the mic I'm using is the right one. That's for sure. So I really can't account for that. I noticed later there's a comment that says it's much better now. Kay says, hi, everybody. And Stacy says, Jared is up by Biden's butt now. Well, he probably is. While he's up there, maybe he can inject some sense into Biden. What an image, huh? Carmen says, eggs jumped quite high in my area. Wow. We haven't seen that yet, but we don't eat eggs in any case because the choline in the eggs is not good for cancer. So we avoid eggs, even though otherwise they're very good, of course, for you. Steve says people without direct deposit may not receive their check for months. That's what they say. Carmen said, Jared who? Had to go tinkle. Jared Bernstein, who worked for Biden during the Obama administration. He was the chief economist for Joe Biden in the Obama administration. Lana says, has Rashida's bill been brought to the floor yet? I'm sure it hasn't been brought to the floor yet. I haven't seen a printed version of it yet. I've been looking, but I haven't seen it yet. Ronnie Sue Cam says Carmen Muniz, yes. Stacy says, my husband was incredulous when I told him the 1200s are a one-time thing. He said people will starve. Carmen said, Dr. Joe, can you increase the volume on your end? Well, as a matter of fact, I could increase the volume a little bit on my end. But I was pretty close to the maximum then, and I'm absolutely at the maximum right now I have available to me. It's not at my end. I mean, it's not happening, okay, at my end. I don't know why it's occurring. It must be happening, intervening between me and Facebook. Carmen says, oh, that sucks. And Kay says, I got added to a new FB group today about WMMS radio in the 70s to 80s today. WMMS out of Cleveland back then was the best FM rock station in a nation for 10 plus years. Back when Cleveland really did rock. Enjoying that for a break. Laugh out loud. Kay says, I need a break from all the bad news these days. Steve says, there were some great radio stations back then. Stacy says, they want you to file online. I tried that and hit a snag. So I was able to get a blank Adobe 1040 and do it the old-fashioned way. I used a stamp and sent it snail mail. It should be there within 3 days. Carmen said, what about homeless and displaced people that haven't been able to work because of injury, care, or illness, but can't qualify for SSDI? Oh boy, they've got troubles. They got troubles. Rob says, hi Yoda. Hi Rob. Good to see you. Kay says, yes, there were, but the WMS was voted the best back then. They're partly why the rock HOF is in Cleveland. Now, what's the HOF? Stephen Day smiles. Steve DeVore says, hi all. Rick Maynard says, my senator contacted me yesterday about SSI and SSDI. Don't have to file, but I was on the IRS site. You cannot e-file without having earned income. But there was a notice they were updating their site to address the CARES Act. Seems like they're going to make it possible to file regardless that you don't have any earned income. Hope so. I don't really think anything will be normal again in this country. We need Bernie's big change now. We do, but Bernie keeps on falling behind, okay, in delegates. I don't know how he's falling behind since there are no primaries going on, but he's still tending to fall behind by a little and by a little, okay, and by a little. And I don't know how he's falling behind, given the absolutely abysmal performance of Joe Biden but during this time. I'm convinced that Trump is going to slaughter Joe Biden. just, well, I shouldn't say he's going to slaughter him. I can't really say that because if Trump fails to handle the unemployment crisis and fails to handle the simple crisis of getting money into people's hands so they can live, then Biden could still beat him because people won't care how bad Biden is. They're still going to vote for him just to have a little hope that things will get better if they get Trump out of there. Carmen says China's coronavirus cases are surging back, so this will continue after the peak here. Stabilization funds need to be issued every week, and M4A needs to pass immediately. Well, I completely agree with you, Carmen, but I didn't hear that China's coronavirus cases are surging back. If you've heard that from somewhere, please leave a link so we can check it out. And I checked John Campbell's his rundown of the world corona events every morning when I get up, and I didn't notice that today. Carmen said, which is good the environment, but people must give up their consumerism and overconsumption, and corporations have to stop their unbridled greed. Well, I certainly agree with that, Carmen. And Kay. Steve said, I haven't seen a plane over Los Angeles in days. Only military and police helicopters. Yeah, the airlines are grounded, right? Kay says, no problem, Carmen. I do agree. Kay says, that must seem strange for there, Steve. Yeah, it must be unnaturally quiet. Carmen says, I think I'm going to put on a pot of chamomile. Stomach is acting a fool. Be right back. Sorry to hear it, Carmen. Russ says, let's not try to add to those deaths. Steve says, it's quiet. That's good for the soul. Steve says, I live 4 miles north of O'Hare Airport. I haven't seen any planes either now that you mention it. Yeah, you know, we live fairly close to Dulles Airport here, in Ashburn. And I can't recall very many planes the last week either. It's been quiet here, unnaturally so. Kay says, I bet. I noticed we had some military helicopters going over us here in Northeast Ohio when this began, but not any time lately. Carmen says, Ron DeSantis is allowing church services as essential. I live close to 3 churches, but yes, I still try to not become a tragic statistic. That's insane. To have in-person church services now is insane. They really need to be outlawed. Steve says we have these strange military helicopters, huge with wings. Also propellers on each wing, but pointing straight up. Those are vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, aren't they, Steve? VTOL helicopters. Kay says, yet here too, those are troop movers in the military. Steve says they fly in pairs like twice a day. Carmen says, turn up the volume. Very hard to hear. Thanks. Steve says, thanks for your service. Go fuck yourselves is how I feel the government deals with vets. Steve says, yes, volume is very low. What is going on here? Kay says, wonder what's up, Steve. You do have a lot of bases out there. We do, but why fly low directly over downtown Los Angeles? Maybe I'm being paranoid. Barbara says, I think their Trump are going to find they need to do far more and fast or people will turn on them in a very bad way. This will not end soon. This is going to start hurting up. So it won't just be the working poor suffering. Not sure, Steve. But paranoia is not a bad thing these days, though. Who the hell really knows what is really going on around us all? Carmen says fascism in the wind. Stacy says Perez, hate him. Me too. What a worm. Stacy says he's a tool. He's a useless one, but a tool. He's evidently useful to them. Steve says, well, the delay of the convention is good, in my opinion. More time for Biden's mind to turn to mush. I feel the same way. And Carmen said, found some vitamin D3, which is recommended by Dr. Campbell at Target, under $4. Dried up my left lung after the first gel capsule. Truly amazing. Said to protect from corona. Guys, get some if you can find it. We've been taking it for a long time, actually. Vitamin D3 is a staple for us. We have the 2,000 milligram things, and we usually take 3 of them a day, so we're getting about 6,000 units a day. We take them for dinner, when we go to sleep, and when we get up in the morning. And it's very inexpensive at Costco. Steve says, I'm taking it. Steve says, it's murder to hold an election now. People will die. Yeah, I think there's a good chance some people are going to die in Florida because of the primary they had there, and in Chicago as well, because of the Illinois primary. Carmen says, papers, send in ballots, probably the best option. Kay says, of course Biden is telling people there to go vote, while Bernie is telling them to postpone it so people don't get sick. Steve says, 31-4, SMGDH. Not sure what SMGDH is, but I'll bet it's a I'll bet it's a doozy. Ronnie Sue Camp says all they need is drive-in voting. Pull in, get a paper ballot, pull over, fill it in, and drop it off. Trump is probably blackmailing states using PPE supplies to suppress the vote. Sorry, but I think he's low enough and would do that. Me too. Steve says old and sick people will not go. Carmen says, good. Now I can read your lips, Dr. Joe. Ronnie Sue Camp says, I haven't filed my unemployment app yet. Barbara says, right, on vacation in a pandemic. What a government we have. Carmen says, well, they need to give free Wi-Fi to everyone so they can view and protest during the live stream town halls. Steve Day says, bad generalization. Carmen says, complicit in genocide. Ronnie Sue Camp says, I live in southern Maine. Who's going to do a teletown hall here? Susan Collins? She won't face us anytime or anywhere. Well, go in front of her house and practice social distancing, but make it more like 8 feet apart, because I don't think 6 feet apart is entirely safe. And just have people lined like 10 layers deep in front of her house. Steve Day says, I'm sorry, Stephen Wolfbrand says, Steve Day, I meant that the most vulnerable will not venture out with good reason. Carmen says, sound is better suddenly. I have no idea what happened. I did nothing to make it better suddenly. Stacy left a link to Rashida's Boost Act. Yes, I love that act. Kay says, sound is good here. Dale says, yes, sound is fine here. Carrie Scott says, I filed my unemployment, worked at my grandson's school. Kathy said, sound was fine for me. And Russ said, audio was good on my end. And Steve says, if you haven't, try expanding the window. Is that meant for me, Steve? If so, I'm not sure which window you're talking about. I think my window's full size. And Kay says, Rock Hall of Fame, Joe. Laugh out loud. Oh, HOF, Rock Hall of Fame, yes. I keep saying Trump will eat Biden for lunch. I'm so square, Kay, right? Still, so many states left a primary. Bernie still has a path there. I think he does. He has a path through the Excella primary, especially if Biden's brain continues to turn to mush. Steve says, I'm convinced Biden will lose to Trump too. The only way he'll win is if Trump uh, should mess up things even more than he's done already. I don't think people understand that he's messed up things already. Trump is trying to sell the idea that if we have between 100 and 240,000 fatalities, that he will have done a great job. And I'm not sure the American people are not going to buy that stuff. I mean, I don't buy it for a second, and I'm sure you don't buy it for a second, but I'm afraid that quite a lot of people, okay, are going to buy it. Trump keeps on repeating and repeating and repeating. Oh, no one's ever seen anything like this. We've never done anything like this. We've never had any of these kinds of problems. We've done more than anybody else in the whole history of the United States. We're wonderful. We're fantastic. And he says that every day at every news conference. He goes nuts with his infernal boosterism, and people buy it. They haven't learned anything. Ronnie Sue Camp says the main runway for Portland, Maine is at the end of my street. I heard one plane take off the other night, nothing else. Rick says no problem with your volume here. Rick says night, all take care and be safe. Night, Rick. Carmen Yuna says I think the low volume was due to when you were reading. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I was shouldn't have anything to do with when I was reading because my microphone's in the same place. I mean, I got a mic here. It's a good mic. It's a Samsung. And it works fine. It's got really nice sound. Now, some people are naturally low, okay, in vitamin D. And we discovered that we were short, okay, of vitamin D through some tests that we took, okay, a few years ago. And ever since then, because vitamin D3 is important for fighting cancer, we have been taking essentially mega doses, okay, of vitamin D every day. And I don't know whether that has kept us healthy or the millions of other things we do. So, but we've been very healthy. Okay, and both of us have had cancer. And as far as I know, I still have it now. I still have prostate cancer, which was diagnosed nearly 8 years ago now, about 7.5 years, as an aggressive form of cancer, okay, the Gleason 8 form, okay, of cancer. But I have someone, okay, of my age, I have a PSA that's very low right now. And Carmen says, Corona can travel 27 feet and linger in the air. We need farther distancing. Yes, we do, but I think that's really an extreme that it can travel for 27 feet, okay, and linger in the air. It mostly falls to the ground. And if when we go outside, if we wear a mask and we wear gloves, I think then we have a very good chance to have only a very low incidence of it. Steve says, not for a moment do I buy anything Trump says. Yeah, I don't either. Steve says, you can't trust a liar. It's a wonder to me that people don't understand that. No, you cannot trust a liar. And Carmen says, ooh, shiny Mike. Yeah, shiny Mike. Steve says, I'm vitamin D deficient too. Kay says, I need to get some vitamin D here for sure. Very little sun in northeast Ohio. Second most cloudy place in the country behind the Pacific Northwest. I thought the second most cloudy place in the country behind the Pacific Northwest was Binghamton, New York. But that's another discussion. In any case, how many units of vitamin D did you say per day again? I believe we take 6,000 units, okay, 6,000 IUs, okay, of vitamin D per day in 3 different doses. Carmen says, that's amazing, Dr. Joe. Is it the number of units of vitamin D we take or the PSA? Okay, or the low PSA? After having an aggressive form of prostate cancer. Steve, are you taking 5,000 IUs? Evidently, we're taking 6,000 IUs, I think. But this isn't a contest for how many IUs one should take, because the need is different for different people, and one does have to be careful. But it's been working well for us. Anyway, I think I've covered all your comments. They were fun. Thank you. And thank you for sharing, and thank you for being here. And don't forget my Patreon account, which is at patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And please visit it from time to time. Steve said, that's what my doctor told me to take. Steve says, I'm taking 1,000. I'm going to up that a bit. And Carmen said, the low PSA/aggressive cancer survival. Yeah, what I've been doing is I'm taking a pharmaceutical called actually bicalutamide, which went under the brand name of Casodex, okay, for a long time. And since some testosterone can be produced actually from the adrenal gland, I'm also taking some dutasteride, okay, along with that. And I'm also following the Budwig diet, it's called. Okay, and you can Google that. It's been very successful for many people. And the combination of those things brought my PSA down from, okay, at one point it was as high up as 28. Then I brought it down to 1.16, and it's been gradually increasing since that time, but frankly, I don't know whether that is due now to the cancer getting any worse or tending to come back, okay, or whether it is due to the advancing age, because, you know, I've been getting older, and for someone, okay, of my age, okay, I'm doing very well when it comes to the PSA. Ronnie says, thank you, Dr. Joe. And Carmen says, oh, that's because you're fun. Well, thank you, Carmen. If you're talking to me, I don't know if you're talking to me or somebody else. But anyway, Kay says, thank you, Joe, and everyone for another great discussion. Take care and stay safe and well. We'll talk soon. Yes, everybody, stay safe, Kay, and well. I'll be back on Saturday night. Steve says, nice shirt, Doc. Thanks, Steve. And Steve says, I take some melatonin to sleep. Okay, I recommend it. I forgot to mention that I take uh, actually 5 milligrams of time release melatonin each night in order to sleep, and I recommend it too. It's been good for regulating my biological clock. Carmen says, I did too, but I started to get ulcers. When I stopped, the ulcers stopped. It hasn't caused me to get ulcers. Kay says, Steve, I do a few good night beers to sleep. No, that's not a bad idea. Okay, once again, thanks for coming. Please share this some more. And I am saying good night and be well and stay safe. I'll see you Saturday night.